Let's discuss some of the great new features that have been added recently to Inforiver. To start with, we'll review some changes that have been made to the audit log. Let's come up to Advanced, come over to Audit, and one of the changes is the timestamp that is now on each of these logs, where you can see here, 2 of them were made about 20 minutes ago, and the one below that, which is flagged as the last month with the number of items that was made in that previous month period, also with the timestamp of 1 week ago. Additionally, you can now filter by columns, rows, or cells. If I was to come over here and select this column, you can see all of the changes that have been made to this table just for that column. If I was to select the row here for water heaters, you can see that 2 changes have been made, and similarly, I can select just the individual cell, and you can see the changes made just to that cell. Another feature is that when you're using Inforiver in a more compact form and you open up focus mode for development, you have an option here on the right to show preview. When you select that, notice how you can now see the exact data and information that will be visible when you go back to the compact form outside of focus mode. So it can help give you perspective as you're developing and resizing things during the development process. There are also some new options available for AutoFit. Previously, all of these AutoFit options only applied to the entire table, but now you can individually select any of these columns, come up to AutoFit, and then you can individually use the Fit to Header, Content, Best Fit, or Manual Width for any of the columns that are actively selected. As an example, if I was to select Fit to Header, you can see that just this column resized. There's also a few new options available for the blend feature. As an example, if I was to select Sales and Forecast, come up to Advanced, and select the blend feature, observe how the sales and forecast values automatically populated measure 1 and measure 2 wells over here. So that will happen anytime you select 2 columns before selecting blend, but you still have the option to choose any other calculation if you wanted to besides the one you initially selected. Another feature is that by default it does apply a vertical blend, and we can select create here. However, observe that I can now come up to this, select horizontal, select update, and let's go ahead and resize this. There we are. Now you can see that they are placed next to each other rather than on top of each other. You can also control the padding to choose how much space is put between them. Let's select update. Notice how there is greater padding now placed in the middle. And last but not least, if I remove the selection from this column here, notice in the upper left you have an icon that is designating this as a blend column, so it gets its own dedicated icon now. There are a few new options available for the bullet chart types. To start with, I'm going to select Sales and Forecast and come up to the comparison chart types. And the first thing that I'll mention is that we have a new chart type here called the conditional bar. So let's go ahead and set that for our data. And the conditional bar is a great way to use colors to indicate whether a value is either below or above the range. As you can see here, it's automatically coloring them red or green, but that can additionally be configured by coming up to Appearance and then selecting the colors here. Some other options available if I close out of this and come up to the integrated variance bar. We now have an option to use the fill pattern and be able to choose what of the 3 fill patterns between solid, outlined, or hatched that we can assign to the actual target or additional target. And the last update to these chart types, if we close out of this, come up here to the chart options, and set this to Stephen Few's qualitative bullet, there are some new options for the comparison bands, where by default, the compared series is based off the max value of the series, but then as well, you can also choose to base this off of either of the other data points that are used in the base value, such as the actuals, or the comparison value, which is in this case, the forecast. For the stacked bar chart, we've actually added some great new features. One of the new features is the ability to select a metric from within a category. As an example, we're going to select Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4 sales values. Come up to the chart options, and let's select stacked. And we've now created a chart based off of those 4 categorical values. Additionally, we also have an option to come up here for sorting and choose either default, ascending, or descending. As an example, if I selected descending, you can see that the largest values are now sorted left to right. And last but not least, for the data labels, we also have options for alignment to either have it as left, center, or right. We've also added 4 new visuals under the Others section under Charts. To start with, let's go ahead and select Actuals and Forecast to compare the 2. Come up to the Chart section here, and let's start by selecting the dumbbell plot. And what that will do is create a dumbbell range for the variance between those 2 values, and color the bar either red if it's negative or green if it's positive. And you'll have similar controls to the other chart types here as well for appearance and scale, as well as configuring the label and the color, with options to show additional metrics on the visual as well. In addition to the dumbbell plot, we do have a few different other options as well, such as the range plot, which will give you a bar range instead of a dumbbell. And the range plot has some unique configurations. If you come over to Serious Display, you can actually configure this to have a gradient range or a rounded edge, with the additional option of including a marker type of a line if desired. In addition to the range plot, we also have an arrow plot, which will give a clean arrow appearance in the direction that the data is pointing. And last but not least, if you want a Dumbo plot with one additional variance in there, you can use the dot plot, which will add an additional metric, and that also can be configured by coming to Series Display to choose which metric you would like for either your actual, your target, or your additional target. A few new options have also been added to the formula engine. One example is if you're editing a cell and you want to reference another cell, if you select it, you'll get similar Excel-like functionality where you get a color associated around it with a dotted outline. And you can also add additional other cells, and just like Excel, those will be given now a different color as part of those cell references. And later on, when you come back to that cell for edits, you'll still get the same colored cell references that that data is based on. Additionally, if we come up to Insert Formula, and when Inforiver has been built out to have categories and columns, as you can see here as an example, we have our data broken out by country. If we come over to the formula engine and type in column, there's a new columns reference, which will, if you put a period in there, give you the access to each of those individual categories and the data underlying within them. And last but not least, the examples that you see here down below will now also be partially dynamic and will be based off of the data that you've configured inside of the wells when building out the visual, meaning that you'll only be given examples of metrics that are actually in your data set. Let's look at some of the updates related to calculated rows. One of the updates is related to the template rows. If we come up to Advanced and select Insert Row, we have an option for template rows here. And previously they could only be added to the top level of a balanced hierarchy, but now you can add them to any of the lower levels as well. As an example, let's go ahead and add a template row to one of the rows here. So I'm going to select this row. I'm going to come back up to Insert Row. I'm going to select Template Row, give this a title, Add a Formula, configure it to not include in the total, and go ahead and select Create. And now you can see here where it's been added to each of the parent hierarchies for any of those corresponding rows. Additionally, these newly created template rows can also be used in Smart Analysis. I'm going to close out of here, select any of the values in this row, come up to Smart Analysis, and now notice that I can either do a contribution or variance. Let's go ahead and select contribution, and now we can see that the row has been highlighted and there is the percentage comparison column over on the right. And last but not least, one other additional option for any of these calculated rows. As an example, if I was to come up to any row and insert a calculated row within the formula editor here, if we were to edit this, notice how the parent values for any of the categories are included in here, and that's one of the most recent additions for the formula engine. Two new options are available for the data bar. I'm going to select my actuals, come up to conditional formatting, select data bar, select one of the colors. The first enhancement I'll mention is the fact that we can now pick a min and a max color, and then Inforiver will automatically create a color gradient between the two of them. Additionally, if we come up to alignment, we now have an option to also choose a right alignment for the bar if we want to as well, which you can now see reflected in the column here. Now let's come up to display and explore the new configurations that are available. To start with, we've added a search bar up here at the top to help you more easily navigate all of the various features and functions in here. As an example, if I search for bar, it will show me everything that contains these letters as a wildcard search. It also has multiple types of search tags available. You can search for invert as an example, and it will show you the sign and headers as an option to actually configure on and off that's related to positive and negative numbers. If we clear this out, we can explore some other features. Additionally, we now have an option to turn off the measure header. If I was to disable this, you can see that that top header row has now been hidden. We also have the option to control header word wrap for rows and columns by default, completely turning it off, or having it just for columns or rows. And I will mention that there's a specific row height requirement. As you can see here, the text is being cut off even though word wrap is turned on for rows and columns. So let me adjust the row height for the table and show you the word wrapping turning on after I increase the row height. And there you can see now the printers, scanners, and fax has been wrapped around because there is enough height in the row to do 2 lines of text. Another option as well, as an example, if you were to come up to any of these cells and make some cell edits, you can now see that the symbol that indicates the cell edit here, which is the little pencil icon, if we come back up to display, we can use the edit cell indicator, and if we turn that off, that will disable that icon. Coming up now to hierarchy, within the row total section, there's now an option to adjust the padding specifically for the row totals. If I was to increase this, just those total rows will now get an increased height. And last but not least, we're going to come over to numbers, and now we have an option for custom labeling, which will give us a full customization option for all of the scaling for short, medium, and large text. Simulation has a couple of important updates as well. The first one is that if you select any parent level row, such as this one as an example, and use the slider to make an adjustment or enter a cell value in there, it automatically will take that value and then apply it to all the children or leaf levels below it. Additionally, I can now multi-select using Control and select multiple rows, and then any of the sliders that I make an adjustment to. As an example again, I'll make this minus 24% instead. That will adjust it to all of the selected cells. Let's explore some of the new formatting features available. To start with, we now have the option for multiple cell selection when applying formatting, such as if we were to select a few of the cells here using the Control key and the left mouse button, and if we were to apply any of the formatting settings, such as bold or underline as an example, you can see that that is now being applied to multiple cells. Additionally, now that we're on this, we have the option to underline many of the elements in here. If I was to come over here and turn on the rails, everything from the grouped headers to any of the column headers or any of the row headers as well, including the cells, can now all be underlined. As an example, I'll go ahead and underline the group header here and actually any of the row headers as well. We've also added a bunch of new features for the borders. So I'm going to go ahead and select the group header here at the top, come up to border, and let's go ahead and select custom. And I'll go ahead and add a top, left, and right border here. Change the color to something a little bit darker, and add a few pixels in here. Select apply. Let's go ahead and select off of the cell. And now you can see the border with the rounded edges being applied as a top frame. Additionally, you can also apply this setting if you were to select this, come up to the format painter, and select the other group. And there you go. You can see that the formatting from the actuals group column here applied everything from the underline to the border and the rounding over to this new group column header over here on the right. We also have additional reset options as well under actions. If you come up to here, we have one option to reset formats, which will reset all of the formatting, style choices, and anything related to visuals, either as conditional formatting or charts that have been added. We can reset all of the notes that have been added by users or developers, or we can reset everything in the entire Inforiver visual back to default. We also have some exciting new chart enhancements available. To demo this, I'm going to come to Sales, I'm going to come up to the charts and add a bar chart. Now let's come up to Customize. Now the first thing I'll mention is that all the charts available now in Inforiver have the option to do an axis configuration where you can choose to show the Y or the X axis. And if I close out of this, notice the number of tick marks that are available on the X axis right now. Now if I take this and I resize this and I make it bigger, it will scale and automatically add additional tick marks in there to fill the range that you have in the column width. And specifically for the bar chart visual, we have options for data label flip, where if you apply this, it will left align the data labels over on the left and then push the bar to the right. And you have options as well to control the padding between the bars. If I added 10 here, notice how the padding between the bars increases a little bit. We also have two additional exciting new features for the bar chart, the reference band and the reference line. Let's first start by adding a reference line. And you can actually add multiple reference lines in here. So we'll start by adding a new line, and let's just keep it at the default and go ahead and select apply to begin with. And you can notice here that it is applying a unique reference line in each one of the categories that we have, because currently the value display is set to the subcategory level. So if we actually change this to category, come back down and select apply, we'll actually now get one universal reference line that is applied across all categories and subcategories. So you have the option to control what level of your hierarchy you would like to apply this to. Additionally, you can also choose the type of line you want to apply. If I was to change this to meeting it instead, you'll see that the value of the line will also change as well. If I select apply. And last but not least, you do have some styling options to choose the type of line you would like with any of these that you see below, the color, and also as well whether or not you want to have it in the front or behind the bars. If I selected that and apply, you can see now that it is showing behind the bars themselves. Let's go ahead and delete this and add a reference band as well. Now for the reference band, you can only apply one, unlike the reference line, which can have multiple applied, but you still get similar options at what level you would like to apply it to. In this case, I have 2 levels in my hierarchy, so I can apply it to either of those levels. Again, we have the choices of what type of calculation we want to do. Now what's unique to the reference band is where you want it to start from. Right now it is starting from min, and if you take a close look at the bar right now, it is actually slightly in front of the axis. Now if I actually set that to 0, selected save, it is now aligned with the axis. And then additionally, I can also choose to set a unique value in here as well for the constant. Let's go ahead and provide a value into here. Select save. And you can now see that the reference line is now filling down only to that minimum start where I've defined it in the constant line. And then as well, we have similar options for the line styles down here. We have a few new options for the stepped layout options. To observe these, let's come up to navigation and change it from the default of hierarchy to a stepped layout. And the first option you'll have, if you come to any of the rows and access the context menu, you have an option now to expand to either all, which opens up all of the levels of the hierarchy, or to any specific level, just as well as using the collapse option for any of those as well. Additionally, if we close out of this, you can notice at the bottom that I have a hierarchy with 2 different levels, but only 1 level in the subcategory. So in this case, I can actually come up to display, open up the hierarchy settings, And you'll notice at the bottom there is an option to remove single children. If I turn this on, we'll now see that it has collapsed the total and gotten rid of that for that single child node because the subtotal will equal the value of that single child. I also have a few configuration options of how to configure the single child rows. If I switched it to parent only as an example, it will actually display that child at the parent level, but by default it will be set to all with a few other options available. There is also a healthy amount of updates available for the Sparkline visuals. To start with, let's go ahead and select Sales, come up to the Sparkline chart options, and I'll add an area Sparkline. Now the first thing you might notice is that we now have an option for null display where by default it will automatically consider nulls as 0. You can connect over the nulls to remove the gaps, or you can skip the nulls entirely. Additionally, if you come up to Appearance, there is additional configuration options. There are other configuration options now available for area color, the line color, the max and the min colors, as well as the label color, in addition to being able to choose how much you want the stroke width to be. If I was to increase this to 2, you can see that the stroke width now in the visual also increases as well. Closing down to this, if we come over to here and change this to a win-loss type, the new formatting option for this is the ability to control the padding, which can be configured here. If I increase this to 10, you can see that the padding now increases between all of the bars. We also have an entirely new type of Sparkline that can be added called the baseline. I'm going to start by selecting Sales minus Forecast, coming up to Sparkline, selecting Baseline, and what that does is it calculates a constant value to be used in the middle, and then per period that is across this Sparkline, it will tell you whenever your values are either below or above that threshold. And that threshold can be observed and configured if you come up to Axis Configuration, and by default it is set to median, but as you can see here you have other options as well to set it to, as well as being able to configure the type of line that you would like to display. And the last update to Sparklines is that you can now specify a Sparkline for a subset of your column categorical data. As an example, if I wanted to do the first quarter for January, February, and March, I can come up to Sparkline, add one of the types of Sparklines here, and it will add it just for the period that I had selected for those columns. And enhancements have also been made to the navigation ribbon when Inforiver is in a smaller or more compact form. Let's go ahead and resize this down a little bit. And in a smaller form, if I move my mouse up to the top, you'll see here that there is an arrow that has a drop down with a compact ribbon that pops out if you click onto that, with the scroll option over here to access all of the menu. Additionally, within here, you can also open this back up and you can do the full menu as well with an option to scroll through to get access to the entire ribbon. There are also some new features available for the column context menu. If I open this up, number 1, you have an option to pin a column, and if I was to pin this, it automatically creates a pinned column over here on the left, and as I scroll through, that will remain constant and on top as I scroll through the rest of the data. Additionally, if I come back up to these menus, in here I also have a separate submenu where I come over to this section and I can choose to filter this specific column with a series of conditions based off the data type that will filter the entire table to rows that match this condition. We've also added additional options. If I wanted to group rows together, I can select multiple rows, come up to Insert, select Group, and then I can provide a custom label for this group, as well as choosing whether or not I want to put it on the top or the bottom within this hierarchy. Select Apply, and there you can see this new row group being added here. Additionally, if I was to select an entire level, I can come up to Home, and if I use the Hide option here, it will automatically hide all of the children below it. And the last thing to mention for this video is the addition of column spacing. If we come up to Display, scroll down to the bottom, we'll notice that we have a section for column spacing, and if I turn this on, you can observe between each of the columns now a little bit of padding, which can be additionally configured here if you want to increase the pixel width.